Welcome to Not Atypical Real Estate Marketing Show, the show where we explore all things creative in an effort to move the real estate marketing industry forward. My name is Mark.
I'm Sky.
And we are the founders of Atypical. Today, we are going to be looking at remarketing. So whether you're looking to build your brand or generate leads for your leasing team or sell products and services to the real estate industry, remarketing is a really powerful technique that you should be sort of implementing. This is our first episode, so before we actually get onto the sort of topic for today, remarketing, we wanted to just tell you a little bit more about Atypical and sort of how this show came about. So Atypical is a full-service digital marketing agency. What makes us a little bit different is that we work exclusively in the real estate space. So we only work with owners, operators, and developers of real estate, and then the technology companies that provide their products and services to the industry. In terms of services, we are really, end to end. So we do everything from social media to paid media. We have a full sort of creative studio, so creative writing, creative design. We do SEO, we do strategy, and then campaigns. So if you're making sort of looking to make a big splash in the industry, that's where that comes in. We put a lot of effort into making sure that the experience of working with us is remarkable. Our delivery team is actually based in Cape Town in South Africa. That's where we are today. And our client base is pretty much 100% US though, and that's the market that we know and understand.
Cool. So why the need for the Atypical Real Estate Marketing Show? So as an agency, we spend a lot of time trying to come up with that light bulb moment. We spend hours in boardrooms brainstorming all sorts of different campaign ideas with the perfect solution to the problem we're looking to solve. But in reality, those light bulb, burst of magic moments very rarely happen, and actually majority of our best ideas are products of our conscious and unconscious thoughts that have been developed over time. So in exploring this a little bit more, we realized that we really need to be creating a space that's encouraging and fostering these unconscious thoughts and ideas and conversations, and a space that's kind of consistently encouraging and leading the conversation around marketing and real estate. So, the real purpose of the Atypical Show is to move real estate marketing forward. It's the why behind everything that we do, why we started Atypical, and why we're here today.
Yeah.
So, things are changing all the time, and we wanted to use this as an opportunity to connect with our audience, to start conversations, and hopefully together to inspire a bit of creativity and innovation within our space.
I think the important thing, is that it's together, that we're looking to build a community where we can have the conversation. This is not about us just sitting up here and sort of blasting out ideas and thoughts. It's about your involvement. So we want you to subscribe to the show. We want you to leave comments. We want you to ask questions. We want you to tell us what you want us to talk about, so that together we can build this community and kind of move the sort of real estate marketing industry forward.
Cool. But before we kick off, and in case you didn't pick up on it earlier, or you haven't picked up on our beautifully sexy accents, Mark and I are from South Africa. Our entire delivery team is based in Cape Town, but considering that almost all of our clients are in the US, the fact that we're from, not yet, South Africa is often a point of conversation on our client calls. And so in addition to talking about all things commercial real estate and marketing, we also wanted to use the sort of Atypical Show as an opportunity to share some of our favorite things about South Africa with you. So showcasing some of our favorite local products, and just giving you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about our culture and our beautiful country, and what makes South Africa unique and atypical. So Mark and I are a sucker for good wines, and Cape Town is known for its incredible wine farms. So because it's our first episode, we thought it was only appropriate to kick off with a bottle of bubbly. So today's feature product is a South African MCC called Krone. So this one is the Borealis Vintage Cuvée Brut. So an MCC is essentially South Africa's version of a champagne. It stands for Method Cup Classique, and it is made using the same French sort of style, French method of making champagne. We just don't call it champagne because our grapes are locally grown and harvested, as opposed to being grown and harvested in Champagne, France. So this is a vintage-only MCC. Well, Krone is a vintage-only MCC, and it's produced on a wine farm called Twee Jonge Gesellen. No, Twee Jonge Gesellen.
I won't try and say that.
No, it's Afrikaans, which is one of our languages. We have 11 in South Africa, well, 11 official languages. But yeah, so it's named after, it means 2 young bachelors, and it's named after the founders of the farm. It's in Tilbach, which is a little wine farm, well, a little town about an hour outside of Cape Town. And this is a brut, so it's quite a dry MCC. It's made up of 73% Chardonnay and 23% Pinot Noir grapes. And I mean, I love wine, like a lot, but I'm not very great at like picking up on the different like smells and all the different types of flavors that you're supposed to pick up. So I have the tasting notes in front of me, but I want to test Mark's tasting ability. So, I mean, we've had this champagne a lot. It's one of our favorites. But Mark, I want you to tell me what you taste.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you say you don't know much about the tasting, I'm going to know even less, but I'll give it a try. I mean, when I took my first sip, it's definitely, I mean, I've had this before, so I do, but...
Cheating.
Trying to sort of sum it up. I mean, the bubbles do kind of like explode in your mouth. It's quite, it's quite fresh. Like as those bubbles explode, that taste definitely like lingers for quite a while
in a good way.
In a good way, and just gets like sort of richer as the sort of taste develops. To be honest, I'm not experienced enough to kind of point out any specific like flavors or anything. I mean, it's delicious, and I've had this many times before, but more than that, I would just be guessing. So why don't you?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, they describe it pretty beautifully. You're supposed to be picking up bursts of elderflower and apple blossom, intermingling with orange peel and crushed oyster shell.
Yeah, yeah.
You get the shell.
Yeah, yeah. Now that you say crushed oyster shell, I definitely pick that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's good.
It is delicious. Yeah.
Kind of, it says it in the tasting notes, but this is really like typically enjoyed with a beautiful seafood dish, freshly caught lionfish, or some beautifully steamed fresh mussels. And we have included some links in the notes for where you can purchase this internationally. If you are struggling to find a sort of local supplier wherever you are in the world, please reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to try and point you in the right direction, because it really is worth buying.
It's brilliant. Delicious.
Cool.
Cool. I guess we better move on and actually get started with the topic for today. So remarketing. Sure, that's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, remarketing. So essentially, remarketing is the process of delivering sort of targeted content to people who have engaged with your brand in a specific way. So today we're going to be looking more specifically at people who have engaged with your brand through your website, and then serving remarketing content to them through a specific platform. So the platforms that we generally use for our remarketing campaigns are Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and the Google Display Network, which has a huge sort of coverage. And each of these platforms has a different way of implementing the sort of remarketing from a technical point of view, which we'll cover a little bit later, in order to sort of activate remarketing, to build the audience, and then serve content to that audience. But that's, in a sense, you know, at a high level, remarketing is serving content to people who have already engaged with your brand or your website. So each of these platforms has their own specific sort of technical tracking codes that you need to install in order to sort of create the audiences and run remarketing campaigns, which we'll get into a little bit later.
Cool. I think, I mean, if we're looking at why it's important to be creating or establishing a remarketing strategy, the biggest value that companies are seeing is the ability to build brand recognition, trust, and loyalty by consistently exposing your target audience to a very specific content piece and your brand message. And we all know that brand awareness nurtured over time really does lead to higher conversion. So typically, you know, someone will find your potential prospect or customer will find your site by doing a basic Google search. They might click onto your website. If you're lucky, they might browse a couple of pages, but majority of the time they'll click off without actually performing any action or conversion or making any kind of purchase. In fact, 96% of website visitors do exit pages without kind of doing anything. And 49% of website visitors come back to the site sort of between 2 to 4 times before they actually make a purchase. So if we kind of apply this to real estate and look at it, how it might impact the real estate industry, you know, when someone's making a decision to lease a retail space, for example, that is a very long buyer journey. That's not a decision that you make overnight. You do a lot of research, and it really does require significant sort of brand awareness and loyalty, particularly as a REIT, if you're trying to convince someone to lease space from you as a landlord. So, you know, kind of remarketing really does allow you to build brand awareness and kind of get in really on in the buyer journey, and then kind of continue to deliver very specific kind of messaging throughout each subsequent phase of the buyer journey. So I think in addition to building brand awareness, some of the things that I love about remarketing is that you can also tailor your ads very specifically to the types of content that your audience is engaging with, and then display it on places that they're frequenting, like LinkedIn and Facebook and even industry news sites and blogs. So it really does go a long way. And I think in terms of kind of its main benefits, it's super cost effective. So in comparison to a lot of your other sort of paid media strategies, you can kind of spend relatively less to target essentially the exact same audience. So yeah, it's also, like I said earlier, the ability to kind of personalize your content based on the type of products that people are searching. So for example, again, kind of bringing it back to real estate, if somebody's visiting a particular property on one of your property state pages, you can then retarget them with other properties in that same state. And then in terms of conversion and kind of engagement, it really is kind of the most effective strategy in our experience. You know, retargeted audience members are 3 times more likely to click on an ad than kind of cold prospects. And consumers or audience members that have been engaged with the retargeting ad are 70% more likely to convert. So
yeah, I think that's an important thing, is that, you know, from a marketing point of view, you spend a lot of effort and money sort of acquiring people's eyeballs and attention and driving them to your website, and then you think that once they've sort of hit your website, you kind of, you know, sort of forget about them or assume that they will come back on their own accord. But like you said, I mean, it's such a long buyer journey, and keeping your brand top of mind and building that familiarity and trust takes a long time, especially with real estate leasing or technology sort of products and services. These are not quick decisions. You know, we're not buying a pair of shoes. You know, it's a big decision. It takes time. So acquiring that eyeball to your website or that engagement with your brand is the first step. But this really allows you to kind of nurture that engagement for as long as it takes to get them to the point of actually becoming a customer or a tenant.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, just to add, I mean, if you think about how many ads you get exposed to on one day, it's really not enough to kind of rely on one big ad push and just think, oh, I've created an amazing campaign, it's a brilliant ad, they'll see it once and they'll convert. Like, you really do need to be like constantly keeping up with your competitors and staying top of mind and being at the front of those ads.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to quickly touch on some of the sort of technical aspects in terms of how to set up remarketing. So the first thing that you need to do is actually get your remarketing code, which is the sort of bit of code snippet that comes from the specific platform that you're looking to run the remarketing on. So we have included specific instructions on how to get those code snippets from the different platforms in the notes. So go and check that out. But once you've got the code snippet, you need to actually deploy that code on your website. There's a number of different ways to do this. If you're using a content management system, you can do it generally through there, a system like HubSpot, or if your website is hosted with another CMS platform. Your IT team might need to get involved if you don't have a CMS platform to deploy it through. The easiest way that we found is using Google Tag Manager. So It's a really sort of easy way to kind of deploy code snippets to your website. A side note, if you're not using Google Tag Manager, it's definitely something that you should look into, not only for deploying sort of remarketing code snippets, but also for implementing sort of triggers and events that you want to track specific micro and macro conversion points on your website so that you can see exactly how your audience is behaving once they hit your website, not only for remarketing campaigns, but all campaigns. Once your code is deployed to the website with whatever method you're using, the next thing you have to do is test it and make sure it's working correctly. So you can either use Google Tag Manager, that's one way. If you're not using Tag Manager, another easy way to do it is using Google Tag Assistant, which essentially is a browser plugin that allows you to open your website, and the plugin will show you if your tracking code is firing off correctly. Once everything is sort of firing correctly, the next thing you have to do is actually define your audience that you want to build. So in your platform, so Facebook, for example, you build your new audience, and it's a remarketing audience, and that audience can be as broad and wide as everybody who comes to your website, all visitors to your website, or as narrow as people who have been to a specific page on your property or spent a specific duration of time on your website, for example. Once you've defined that audience, you can then build the campaign that you want, load the creative, and use that remarketing audience as your audience that you're going to then serve the content to.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that's pretty much how you sort of go about setting it up. And
Good luck.
Yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, once you've got it all set up, like any marketing campaign, there are best practices that you should be following. So we've identified our sort of top 5. The first one is keeping at least one remarketing campaign running at all times. So, you know, this remarketing campaign like the ones that we're describing are relatively inexpensive, and they really are long-term strategies. So they're most effective when you're just allowing them to run. Obviously, that does require that you've nailed down your content strategy and your target audiences, but once you've got that waxed, just allowing it to run. You don't need to go in and daily manage it and optimize it. It's best performed when it just kind of ticks over in the background. Number 2 is test your audience. So we all know that testing goes a long way in ensuring that you're optimizing your budget to get the highest return on investment. So Google Analytics allows you, kind of what Mark was touching on earlier, to really create very specific target audience groups. So you can target people who have visited a specific page, people who have visited your site over the certain period of time, 30, 60, or even 90 days, people who have visited your site more than once. So it's our recommendation that you create those different audience groups and serve them different types of content, and then really look at what audience group is performing the most, which one is converting the highest, and then obviously put a bit more spend behind that one. So the one thing to be careful about, though, is that you shouldn't segment too much. So it's recommended that you need an audience of at least 1,000 in order for your remarketing strategy to be effective. So number 3 is, once you've nailed down your target audience, you need to nail down your content strategy. So I feel like I've been harping on about this quite a bit, but the content really is extremely important. You need to make sure that you're serving very relevant and value-adding content to each member of your different type of audience group based on where they are in the content, in the buyer journey. Number 4, exclude users or audience members that have already converted. So it's not really best practice to serve an ad to someone that encourages them to perform an action that they've already performed. So if you're asking them to inquire on a specific property, for example, and they have already inquired, it kind of seems a bit unnecessary and could potentially leave a bad taste in your audience member's mouth in terms of kind of how you engage with them and creating brand loyalty and trust. So, you can go in and you can exclude those specific audience members from receiving similar types of ads sort of post-conversion.
Yeah, I mean, that's why it's important to set up those sort of micro and macro events that you're tracking so that you can exclude people who have performed specific actions, further down the line. But on that point, I think it's also important not to discount that sort of customer base completely from your remarketing strategy. On a leasing side, for example, remarketing to existing tenants might be an effective strategy if they're looking to open a second location. You just need to make sure, like Sky said earlier, that the content that you're serving them is appropriate and relevant to where they are as a business. So opening a second location.
Cool. And then lastly, paying attention to your ad frequency. So it's very frustrating when you're consistently seeing the exact same type of ad. And in our experience, it's important to pay attention to your ad frequency and to make sure that you're not exceeding anything above 4. In our experience, that typically starts leading to negative campaign results.
Yeah, so just to expand on that, so your ad frequency is calculated basically by your total reach divided by the number of impressions. So if your campaign is running for a month, your ad frequency is essentially telling you how many times people are going to generally see your ad within that month. So you want to keep that below 4 essentially.
Yeah, and if it does exceed 4 and you've still got a couple of months left of your sort of campaign, then our advice would be to change up the creative, change up the messaging, to make sure that the audience is still receiving fresh and exciting content.
Yeah. So we use remarketing pretty much for all of our paid campaigns that we run for our clients in sort of one shape or another. One strategy that definitely has sort of worked extremely well for us in the past has been Facebook dynamic remarketing ads. And we just wanted to share a little bit more about it with you. So essentially, Facebook dynamic ads allows you to create an ad template that pulls content dynamically depending on who's viewing that ad. So,
for example, if you've ever shopped on like Nike, for example, and you've looked at a particular pair of running shoes, you might click onto Facebook a couple of days later or even 5 minutes later and be served an ad for those exact running shoes. And then often it'll be accompanied by lots of other little ads that feature gorgeous outfits that will perfectly accompany those shoes. So that is a Facebook dynamic ad.
Yeah, so essentially what we're suggesting is the same thing, but instead of running shoes and outfits that go with it, we're serving them information about a specific property that they've viewed or properties that are in the same area as they might be interested in. So essentially you're using the Facebook sort of catalog to load all of your property portfolio, which contains all of the property images and all of the highlights and any additional information that you want to put on your ad. You're then building a remarketing audience at a property level. So you're building that audience for people who have been to a specific property page, and then you're serving those dynamic content ads to that remarketing audience. And the nice thing about using that Facebook catalog is that you're using one template, so you don't have a lot of maintenance in terms of ad maintenance, and you're just maintaining the content in that Facebook catalog to serve the content dynamically. So it's quite easy to update that content with, as information on the property changes or images on the property changes. So it's a really cool way of nurturing people who have shown intent on your website, but are not at that point of sort of contacting the leasing team or inquiring with your your company. So it's definitely something you should check out. Wow, we've covered quite a lot today.
Overloaded with information.
Yeah, we've covered quite a lot today. So just in wrapping up, we wanted to leave you with 3 sort of takeaways to our sort of most important bits in terms of remarketing. So point number 1 is that remarketing is not a once-off push. Remarketing is an ongoing strategy and always on strategy.
Cool. So point number 2, even though it is an ongoing and always on strategy, it's really important that you're paying attention to your content and making sure that you're keeping it up to date, relevant to your target audience as they progress through your buyer journey. I feel like I can't say that enough.
Yeah. And the final point number 3 is listen to the data. So make sure you allow enough time up front before your campaign starts to set up the goals, set up the events, set up the micro and macro conversion points so that you can really understand how your audience is engaging with your remarketing campaign. So that is it for today. We've covered a lot. Like we said, please subscribe, ask questions, join the community, let us know what you think, let us know what you want us to discuss next, and look out for episode number 2 coming soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.